Members of the committee will please be in order. Members of the committee, you have before you for your consideration House Bill 513. The clerk will read the title of the bill.
Mr. Chairman, House Bill number 513, introduced by Wagner, bill for enacting title act allowing the state of Montana and political subdivisions to collect various financial transactions in gold, gold and silver coin, electronic gold currency, or legal tender of the United States, allowing certain persons conducting various financial transactions with the state or political subdivision to conduct transaction in gold, gold or silver coin, electronic gold currency, or legal tender of the United States, requiring that certain financial transactions between the state and other persons involving certain taxes, fees, and charges on cigarettes and tobacco products be conducted in electronic gold currency, requiring the Department of Administration to adopt rules for the administration of payment by and receipt by the state and political subdivisions in gold, gold and silver coin, or electronic gold currency, providing an appropriation, amending sections, and providing an effective date and applicability dates. Mr. Chairman.
Members of the committee, you now have before you House Bill 513. What is your pleasure? Representative Wagner.
Mr. Chairman, I move when this committee does rise and report after having under consideration House Bill 513, it recommend the same do pass.
Representative Wagner.
Members of the body, House Bill 513, the purpose of this bill simply authorizes the state of Montana to establish an infrastructure within our accounting system to accommodate the gradual transition to sound money as defined by Article 1, Section 10 of the United States Constitution. This will establish a reserve of silver and or gold in various forms to accommodate transactions using the tobacco tax revenue stream to do so. Members of the body, initially no person or business is required other than those described in the bill to use the system, but it is believed that there is an abundant interest in others doing so. The initial revenue stream, while small, could be expanded as others realize the benefits to the honest money protected from political manipulation and value. Members of the body, to return to this system of honest value, former Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan suggested that a system would be needed to be developed to operate in a dual currency. He further indicated that this should occur gradually. Dr. Edwin Vieira, a constitutional law scholar and professor at Harvard University, has developed the legislation before you today to do exactly what former Federal Reserve Chairman Greenspan suggested. I will stand for questions.
Is there discussion? Representative Ingraham.
Mr. Chairman, I move that House Bill 513 be amended and request that the amendment be posted and deemed read.
So ordered.
And
what is amendment number?
My amendment number is HB 513005.
So ordered. The question now arises on the discussion.
Okay.
Any discussion on the amendment?
Okay, I'd like to explain what the amendment does. If you look on the title page, on the very page 1, lines 16 and 17, you'll see that what's stricken out is requiring the Board of Investments to invest at least 10% of the assets of the teachers' retirement system in gold and silver. And in committee, that was taken out. But if you go to page 24, when it went through the process, it was not removed from the bill. And what this amendment does is put back together what actually came out of state administration. And I would ask a green light to at least present the bill as it was intended.
Is there discussion on the amendment?
Mr. Speaker, I'll speak to the...
Representative Wagner.
Mr. Speaker, I'll speak to this amendment. Although I consider this amendment friendly and I agreed to take it out, my intent to put it in was merely to protect the teachers' fiscal soundness of their retirement system. It's very clear that had this been in place 2 years ago, our teachers' retirement system wouldn't be suffering as to the degree it is today. I'm sorry to say that, but I do consider it friendly, and I don't wish to impose anything on anybody that doesn't want to have it imposed upon them other than the described entities in the bill.
Representative Knox. Oh, excuse me. That's on the bill. Any more discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, does the sponsor wish to close? Sponsors close. The question now arises on the amendment of Representative Ingraham. Those in favor, vote aye. Those opposed, no. The clerk will read absentee votes.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker has voted aye.
Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change his or her vote? If not, the clerk will record the vote.
Mr. Chairman, 89 representatives have voted aye, 10 have voted no.
The amendment passes. Back on the bill as amended, Representative Knox.
Mr. Chairman, I move that House Bill 513 be amended and request the amendment be posted and deemed read, and that is Amendment 513001.
So ordered. Representative Knox.
This amendment, I hope, is being seen as a friendly amendment, and what it does, just real quick, I'm not going to go through every single line, is it makes it permissive for the tobacco companies to pay in this way, not mandatory. However, it does require that the tobacco taxes be converted into silver or gold or electronic representation of that by the state. Also, if you choose to receive payments from the state in these currencies, provided that they're available, the state would deduct any fees in order to transfer or convert those funds to you, so it makes it fair. So what the state goes ahead, what the state takes on in changing these from cash or credit card or whatever to silver and gold, they will make it up not only in the value through fiat money being inflated, but also by recouping that cost when they transfer it to those receiving payments. That's it.
Anyone wishing to speak on the amendment needs to press their amendment button. A couple of more things popped up in the queue that are on the bill. Representative Wagner, you have one on the amendment.
Mr. Speaker, I don't consider this friendly, nor do I consider this hostile towards this issue. The purpose of the tobacco tax revenue stream being used and using the tobacco industries to start this ball rolling is, you got to remember that this is a very small revenue stream, of which is a prototype of which we can evaluate and assess the success on its implementation. I believe that the tobacco tax lobbyists have worked a lot, just like a lot of lobbyists here. They do not understand nor appreciate the effort that's put in here to look out for their best interests. I'd like to see the tobacco companies be viewed as something positive rather than just wrecking the lives of our children and our society through tobacco use. I think this would be a very good step towards that, should it be successful. And should it not be successful, I don't think there's any harm done. So vote as you will.
Seeing no further discussion on the amendment, does the sponsor wish to close?
Yes, I do. I can agree with the good Representative Wagner. However, what this does do is, by making it permissive, it forces the state to convert the funds into silver or gold so we can, in fact, implement this policy. It allows any opposition from saying, hey, why point the finger at me? And it also opens it up to any other taxpayers the ability to go ahead and use this method of payment if they so chose. Please give it a green.
Question now arises on the amendment of Representative Knox. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote no. The clerk will read absentee votes.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker has voted aye.
Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change his or her vote? If not, the clerk will record the vote.
Mr. Chairman, 38 representatives have voted aye, 61 have voted no.
The amendment fails. Back on the bill as amended. Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Will the sponsor yield?
Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Wagner, I just want to make sure I understand how this bill works. So let me give you a hypothetical example. If I'm filling out my income tax return, that's still going to be done in dollars, is it not?
Actually, Representative Barrett, it's going to be done in Federal Reserve note equivalents.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Follow up.
By Federal Reserve note equivalents, do you mean what most of us mean by the term dollars?
Mr. Barrett.
Representative Barrett.
Representative Barrett.
Go through the chair, please.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Barrett. Article 1, Section 10 in the Coinage Act, April 2nd, 1792, states the definition of a dollar. I don't know what other people know as to be a dollar, but that's probably the problem in this bill.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Follow up.
Let me try my question in another way. Will I continue to calculate, will my tax return look, after this bill is passed, like it looks now? Will I be adding up the same kinds of numbers with dollar signs in front of them, regardless of what the Coinage Act of 17 whatever says?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Barrett, yes.
Thank you. Follow up.
Follow up.
Now, let us suppose that I arrive at a bottom line on my tax return. It says I owe $740, and I want to pay that in gold. Does that mean that at that point I can purchase $740 worth of gold at the current market price and use that gold to pay my taxes?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Barrett, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I move amendment to House Bill 513. It's amendment HB 513002, asks that it be posted and deemed read.
So ordered. Representative Barrett.
Members of the body, the purpose of this amendment is to make absolutely clear what we're doing in this bill. What this bill provides for is for the payment of taxes in kind, or for the receipt of payments from the government in kind. It's a little bit like the old days when you paid the school teacher with chickens. Okay, it's that same idea. You're paying in kind. And there's no particular reason why we should restrict payments in kind to one particular commodity like gold. In fact, all that this amendment does is suggest that we should expand those possibilities. If it's a good idea to pay taxes in kind, and I have no idea why it's a good idea, but if it's a good idea, then surely we don't want to restrict it to just one kind of thing. I'm not proposing chickens here, okay, or hams or anything like that. I'm proposing coal as well as gold. I urge you to support this amendment.
Discussion on the amendment. Representative Wagner.
Mr. Chairman, speak to the amendment. Members of the body, this reminds me of the bullying bill we had before education the other day. However, I won't be bullied, but I can read in Article 1, Section 10 in the Coinage Act dictates that silver and gold only will be used. This is the definition of money. It's constitutional, and I would resist this amendment.
Representative Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't find our Constitution funny at all. And to read out of it exactly, it says, no state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, grant and coin money, emit, make things but gold and silver, coin, a tender in payment of debt. So I stand in opposition of this.
Representative Moore.
Mr. Chairman, I wonder if the sponsor of the amendment will stand for a question.
We yield.
Certainly.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Barrett, you're familiar with Alan Greenspan, the former chairman of the Fed, are you not?
Certainly.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Follow-up?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Barrett, are you familiar with his writings in regard to the issue of the medium of exchange and not being determined arbitrarily?
You'd have to cite the specific writing in question.
Mr. Chairman, I'll speak to the amendment. Mr. Chairman, members of the body, here's what Alan Greenspan wrote some time ago with regard to the medium of exchange, and I quote, "What medium of exchange to all participants in an economy is not determined arbitrarily. First, the medium of exchange should be durable. In a primitive society of meager wealth, wheat may be sufficiently durable to serve as a medium, since all exchanges would occur only during and immediately after the harvest, leaving no value surplus to store. But where store of value considerations are important, as they are in richer, more civilized societies," I think the reference to the chicken, "the medium of exchange must be a durable commodity, usually a metal. A metal is generally chosen because it is indivisible. Every unit is the same as every other, and it can be blended or formed in any quantity." Once again, we return to what is stated in the United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 10, as has been quoted. The amendment is certainly contrary to the Constitution and contrary to sound policy as indicated by the former federal chair, Alan Greenspan. Mr. Chairman, I oppose the amendment.
Seeing no further discussion.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
First of all, with respect to whether coal is durable or not, so far as I know it is, unless you burn it, but I mean, otherwise it's durable. The requirements for a commodity that are going to serve as money are that it be durable, okay, that it not be perishable, that it be divisible, and you know, you can break up coal into small amounts. It's divisible and it's durable. So it would be perfectly fine as a money, but in this bill, gold is not money. Nobody's making gold into money in this bill, as I've pointed out, since the price of it can vary, and since we continue to calculate and engage in transactions in dollars, and use that as a unit of account. All that gold here is a commodity, and we're allowing payment in kind. When we allow payment in gold in this bill, we're not chickens wouldn't be a good idea, I agree with that. But coal is certainly a good idea, certainly as good as gold for the purpose of making payments in kind.
The question now arises on the amendment of Representative Barrett. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote no. The clerk will read absentee votes.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker has voted no.
Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change his or her vote? If not, the clerk will record the vote.
Mr. Chairman, 30 representatives have voted aye, 70 have voted no.
The amendment fails. Back to the bill as amended. Representative Barrett. Or not. Representative Noonan.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that House Bill 513 be amended and Amendment 513-003 be posted and deemed read.
So ordered. Representative Noonan.
Mr. Chairman, just before I start, I too do not find the Constitution funny, and unlike and I am not intending to be a bully, and unlike my good friend from Missoula here, I do want to restrict this to one type of commodity. I'll remind this body that following the development of electricity, the demand for copper in the United States exploded. It continued to increase till it spiked in World War I, where copper was used in every single rifle bullet in that war, much of which came from Butte. It's estimated that Butte, the richest hill on earth, supplied 1/3 of the copper for the U.S. in the late 1800s and early part of the 1900s. And I understand that every member of this body is proud of where they come from. But I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a prouder group of people than Butte folks. We're so proud that we have so many names for our city that we like to give, such as the City of Champions or Butte America, but we're most well known as the richest hill on earth. And yes, yes, silver, gold, even palladium is mined actively now in Butte in the richest hill on earth, but it was copper that put Butte on the map, and by extension, Montana, Mr. Chairman. And I think there's a fact that few people will argue with, that Butte is the greatest city in Montana. And when Butte prospers, Montana prospers, and that's why I think it's in the best interest of Montana to go to a copper standard. Please make like oxidized copper and go green.
Discussion on the amendment. Representative Wagner.
Members of the body, again, I would urge you to resist. And I would suggest that it's that pride that comes from that area that doesn't recognize what we're trying to do here. Members of the body, the mine over in Butte does produce copper, and it produces 500,000 ounces of silver also as a byproduct of producing copper. But leave it to our big government people in this body to figure out the most ineffective and inefficient way to store wealth in a commodity that it would take 1,000 times more product to store and provide wealth for. Ladies and gentlemen, I urge you to resist this amendment and stop this insanity.
Representative Moore.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I would rule that this amendment and the following amendment, if it indeed is brought, are both deleterious. The statement has been recognized, Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution, foremost. Secondly, it's completely outside the scope of the title of the bill, as indicated, gold and silver in the title of the bill. That being the case, Mr. Chairman, I would ask that you rule that this amendment and the subsequent amendment are deleterious and simply a technique to ridicule the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Harris.
Without mentioning any names, Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that there are people within this body that have large hidden supplies of coal and possibly old pipe or copper products. And if that's true, if they're trying to change this bill to support their own hidden wealth, that this should be disclosed. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion on the amendment, the question now arises on the amendment of Representative Nooney. Those in favor of the vote aye. Those opposed, vote no. The clerk will read absentee votes.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker has voted no.
Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change his or her vote? If not, the clerk will record the vote.
Mr. Chairman, 30 representatives have voted aye, 68 have voted no.
The amendment fails. Back on the bill as amended. Representative Moore.
Mr. Chairman, on the bill, I cannot fathom what the opposition to this bill is, ultimately. It's a question of justice, a fundamental question of justice. Justice is defined as rendering unto another that which is due to them. So how is justice when the means by which one is rendered that which is due to them constantly changing and constantly in flux, as it is with the current dollar as we use it? If it has no basis in anything, in any currency, it's constantly in flux. There is no justice in that. The author Michael Greene, writing in his book In Defense of Human Dignity, quote, writes, "Whoever has control over the creation of money as well as how it is created ultimately has control over the lives of everyone. Whoever determines how money is created determines patterns of ownership of productive assets throughout society, the degree of concentration of ownership, and thus has control over everyone's income." This bill simply asserts the opportunity for Montanans to have some basis for the investment in the mechanism that's provided for in the bill. Again, I can't understand how this has anything to do with party. I can't understand how it has anything to do with the simple issue of giving to a wage earner that which is their due. I urge your support for the bill.
Representative Reinhardt.
Mr. Chairman, question for Representative Hands.
Representative Hands, you yield?
I do.
Representative Reinhardt.
Mr. Chair, Representative Hands, what discussion did you have in committee or executive action about the need to create a state currency as a step to allow a state to secede from the Union?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the body. In the opening, you heard about one of our expert witnesses, Dr. Vieira, and after the hearing, I decided to look up what his credentials were and find out more about what his philosophy and background were in terms of proposing this bill. He was such an important expert witness that we actually, as a state, paid to call him in London. So I thought it was vital to find out more about him. And in his writings, which are published online, so you can find him, he has written several papers. One of his papers says the Tea Parties need more teeth. And so he writes, "We, the people, need to revitalize the militia of several states in order to regain and retain popular control over states, and through them regain and retain control over two fundamental powers of sovereignty, the power of the purse, currency and credit, and the power of the sword, community self-defense." So I say to the body that this bill here is a three-legged stool to secession, and he furthermore talks about secession in another paper where he says, "Moreover, a state bent on secession would have to adopt her alternative sound currency well before secession took place, because the state's own operations and her private free market would have to be allowed ample time to introduce the new currency." And so what you're seeing here is one of the first steps of the three-legged stool. It's the alternative currency. And we also have talked about state militia this session, and we've had quite a bit of discussion around secession. So I would say that this bill is an attempt to establish an alternative currency to put the state in a position to secede from the Union.
Representative Knox.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to speak to the bill.
And we're on the bill now. There's some people that are queued up in the amendment. We're no longer on the amendment if you're queued up in the amendment.
With every printing of currency by the Federal Reserve, your dollar and mine is reduced in buying power. It's simply called inflation. The Federal Reserve excludes food and fuel prices from its preferred gauge of inflation. The Fed's monetary policy has also affected prices. The U.S. dollar has fallen substantially in the past 3 years, and the prices of agricultural commodities, which are priced in dollars, have reflected that decline. The result has been a chilling effect on customers in local grocery stores and gas stations. A food basket survey by the Tennessean earlier, well, it says this month, but it was in reference to the article, found a 12.5% increase in prices for the typical grocery basket full of staples compared to November of 2009. The FAO's Food Price Index, which tracks the prices of 55 food commodities, climbed for the 6th consecutive month to hit a 214.7 points in December, its highest reading since the measure was calculated in 1990. Soaring prices for sugar, corn, grain, meat, and oilseeds pushed the index to its new peak. Sugar recently hit a 30-year all-time high. U.S. corn prices surged 52% last year. European wheat prices doubled, and U.S. soybean prices rose 30%. My point is simply this. Our dollars are not purchasing what they did just a year ago. Families are going without or working longer hours and extra jobs to maintain the lifestyle they've grown accustomed to. But while this has happened, the power of silver or gold, its weight, can demand more. By our states banking or investing through the use of some precious metals, we've start to beat the effects of inflation.
Being able to pay more employees, pay more resources with weight that is not expanding. For that, I support this bill, and I ask you to.
Representative Wilmer.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to speak to the bill.
Representative Wilmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the body, I want to give you 4 reasons to seriously consider voting no for this bill. First of all, this is not a gold standard bill in any sense of the term economically. You get the impression that somehow because gold is involved, it would bring greater stability to the state's economy. The gold standard is when without changing the value of gold. It helps to restrict the amount of money we have in our economy. This bill, in fact, unamended, I think, the first case, having to do with the tobacco and cigarette taxes, really mandates only that cigarette and tobacco product taxes be paid to the state in gold or silver. That means if I own a smoke shop or a Me and Jan's, whatever they're called, and I have to pay them to the state, now
I have to go and exchange my dollars for gold or silver, then pay the state. Well, everyone knows that currently the value of gold is variable. Look at where it was 2 years ago. That's why everybody's wishing they had bought some 2 years ago, and where it is now. Bill 2 is hard now with our projected revenues changing just by the expectations of different taxes being paid. Our revenue was held in a commodity like gold, and we watched the variability of that value go up and down throughout the session as we're trying to chase it down to pass House Bill 2 and figure out how much we have in the bank and how much we can spend. Second of all, the sponsor and its proponents, in my view, misunderstand the role of money in our economy. It's true that since the 1970s, we've equated inflation with negative economic conditions. But in fact, what we want is for the amount of money to match the increase in our productivity as a society. That means, I won't go into the monetary theory, it's the amount of money times the velocity of the money that turns over equals the productivity in the society times the price of everything, right? MV equals PQ. Gary kind of remembers that, sorry, Representative McLaren from Econ 101. The point is that as our prosperity, our productivity increases, if we're going to keep prices relatively constant, then we need to increase the amount of currency in the system. Otherwise, prices fall. And we have this, in fact, the idea that inflation is always bad. Deflation is much worse, especially rapid deflation. It always precedes an economic depression because not only do the prices of things go down, but the price of labor, which we call wages, also rapidly declines. So inflation is only bad if it increases faster than the amount of productivity in the society. We want fluidity in our currency for that reason. The third reason I'd urge you to vote against Representative from Missoula, the person who was our chief proponent, our star witness and expert witness, other than the doctor professor from Missoula, who we brought in for some questioning, is, in my view, essentially a conspiracy theorist. The article that Representative Hands read from was titled, "The Tea Party Has No Teeth," and it gave this three-pronged strategy for secession, creating a militia not accountable to the commander-in-chief, the President of the United States, and the necessity of having some state currency, which the witness kept calling the alternative currency. Other articles have been titled, "When Government Currencies Fail, Gold and Silver Prevail," or "The Failure of the Public Sector and the Coming Military Crackdown and How to Stop It." I think those constitute extreme views and not the views of most Montanans, even if they don't understand the common sense about currency and productivity in the economy. Finally, members of the body, I am also a fan of the Constitution. I'm also a fan of the Supreme Court and its decisions, and its interpretations of the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 says that Congress has the power to coin money, to go into debt, to regulate the value of money, and to borrow on United States credit. All of those things have been interpreted by the Supreme Court to imply the necessary and proper power of the United States government to print money. And finally, in Section 10, which is titled "Powers Prohibited to the States," it says states may not coin money. And I know that at one level this bill doesn't say that we should, but the proponent witness, expert witness, said that we should and called this the alternative currency. It's unconstitutional, it's a bad idea, it's a bad economic idea, a bad political idea, and it doesn't represent most Montanans. I urge you to vote against it.
Representative McGilvery.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to speak to the bill real quickly. You know, I can understand the other side of the aisles and their concern about the bill and maybe even some people making light of this bill. But I have to commend Representative Wagner in that he is making a serious attempt to seek to address a serious problem. Now, I don't know that this bill is the correct way to get to the problem. I really don't. I've honestly thought about this bill a lot. I've taken it very seriously. I've read it. I've studied it. I've studied material. And really, honestly, I don't know if this is the right bill, and I'm not even know if I'm going to vote for it or not yet. But I do know that Representative Wagner is seriously concerned and truly trying to address a serious concern. And from my perspective, as I look at this issue, we all know that the Federal Reserve Bank is printing $1.6 trillion in treasuries to deal with a deficit of $1.6 trillion. Most of us know that QE2, quantitative easing that the Fed's been doing, is supposed to end this June. That means the Fed is no longer going to be buying the $1 trillion of treasuries that they have been buying. What that means is that those treasuries have to be bought by other countries, private people, mutual funds, what have you. PIMCO funds, the largest holder of U.S. treasuries, or the largest holder of bonds in the United States, the world for that matter, about a month ago, sold all their U.S. treasuries. Templeton Global Bond Fund, one of the biggest global bond funds in the United States as well, has no U.S. treasuries, hasn't had them for about a year now. Why are they dumping U.S. treasuries? Because when the market has to absorb $1 trillion of U.S. treasuries starting in June going forward for the next 12 months from there, that's going to push down the value of the dollar. Now treasuries, short-term treasuries, are all they are is dollars. They're currencies. So when the dollar falls, then we have this problem of inflation, and that's what's been trying to be dealt with here. And again, I'm not saying this is the right way to deal with it. All I'm saying is that there's a serious concern being addressed, and this bill has a legitimate right to be on the floor to address and think about and have an honest discussion whether we should be talking about this. After all, Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution does talk about gold and silver as being the only kind of coin that a state can do. And I don't think the idea of secession that's just remotely, it's just not what Representative Wagner is trying to do. And with all due respect to my colleague from Bozeman, or Missoula, I just don't think that's where he's going. But when your dollar gets lower and lower, and it's at nearly an all-time low right now, and think about it, oil is denominated in dollars. What's been happening at the pump? Now, I'm not suggesting that's all due to dollars, because it's due to unrest in the Middle East. But a falling dollar, a continually falling dollar, is what creates inflation. Now, again, I have to say I don't know that this is the right solution, but I do want to say that this is a very serious issue for our nation. It's a serious issue for the citizens of Montana who are thinking seriously about inflation and wondering how they're going to deal with inflation. Should be no question before this body that can't be discussed seriously and with thought. And I think this is one of the questions before our country in this day that really does take some serious thought and some serious study and some serious discussion, which I hope we're having here today. I'm going to close my remarks with a quote from Alan Greenspan, and this paper that Representative Moore referred to was written by Alan Greenspan in 1966 in his serious consideration of should America return to a gold standard and how would they do that. And one of his suggestions about how they would do that is to begin to have states like us start using gold as a medium of exchange. That was one of his suggestions. And I don't think Alan Greenspan is a kook. You may disagree with his policies, but I don't know that you'd say that he's not a serious thinker. He says this: in the absence of the gold standard, there's no way to protect savings through the confiscation through inflation, from confiscation through inflation. And I know this bill is not seeking to return to the gold standard. It's simply seeking to have a serious discussion about how we would eventually maybe get there as a country. He says in closing, this is the shabby secret of the welfare status tirades against gold. Deficit spending is simply a scheme for the confiscation of wealth. Gold stands in the way of this insidious process. It stands as the protector of property rights. If one has grasped this, one has no difficulty in understanding the statist antagonism toward the gold standard. And you can see what's happening at the federal level. The Fed is printing $1.6 trillion to finance the federal government and their spending spree. And I suggest that you seriously think about this bill and vote your conscience.
Representative Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to speak on the bill, please.
Representative Kennedy.
Mr. Chair, members of the body, I did sit through all these hearings, and I'm here to tell you the only time I've heard the word secession is from my peers on the other side, and in those printers of those daily things that everybody reads. This bill, I'm proud and honored to stand beside some people who make decisions based on logic and not emotion or fear. We're leaders here, and we can't live by fear. We're charged with the constituents of this treasure state, and it's time that we stand up for what we were put here for. I know it may not be popular, but are we really here to support the people who send us here? Or are we here for headlines? Thank you.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I want to talk about inflation. The inflation robs from the old people, the retired people. Someday I might be there if I ever had a job to retire from. But it robs some people that have money in a savings account. That's one way that if the government inflates the value of the money, inflates money, well, actually it decreases the value of the money. That's one way to get at the money that you have in your wallet or your purse or your savings account. But if you're going to, when you're saving, when you're working during your productive years, you want to store your savings in something that will remain solid. You don't want to put it in something where it's going to be diluted, where it's going to be taken away from you. Deflation, a moderate deflation, is much better than inflation in the fact that it actually helps somebody that's retired. Inflation, if you think your money's going, if you think you're going to put your money in the bank and it's going to inflate, and therefore it's going to be worth less, you're more likely not to put it in the bank because you don't want to put your money in a bank and then lose that money where it's sitting in the bank. And that has a tendency to reduce the savings of a country, and if a country doesn't save, it has less money to invest, and the invested money is for productive purposes. Usually, a lot of times, it's for production. And if we don't keep the value of our money and therefore discourage savings, we also discourage investments. And we need to invest in order to keep our money, our country productive, and in order to keep it competitive with the rest of the world. Thank you.
Representative Hands.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to speak on the bill and actually talk about what it does, because we've been doing a lot of talking about inflation and how to solve the currency issue for the United States. But this bill, if you want to open up the bill, under Section 8, all tobacco tax and related payments to state are required to be made in electric gold currency. Section 8 is a hidden tax on tobacco products. By requiring tobacco taxes to be paid in electric gold currency, Section 8 significantly increased the cost of making payments due to the commissions and other transaction fees that arise from this mandated use of electric gold currency. Electric gold currency providers charge commission fees up to 5% for exchanging dollars into electric gold currency, plus other transaction fees. So there you go. You're actually voting, if you vote for this bill, you're voting for an increase on taxes for tobacco products and for the retailers and wholesalers who would actually face that additional cost when they're paying their tobacco tax liability. This mandate benefits private businesses, but most of them are located out of state, and most of them are actually located out of this country at the expense of Montana benefits. The electronic gold currency providers, which are located out of state, and this is who it benefits, the out-of-state business interests at the expense of Montana residents, because they pay the commissions, fees, and related costs. But what I really want to talk about is it appears that these e-currency providers are owned by foreign interests and operate outside of the United States. So let's consider that when we're talking about whether we want to vote for this bill or not. And finally, the tobacco tax provisions are vulnerable to a constitutional challenge. And yes, we talk about this all of the time, but we've had people quoting the Constitution here on the floor, and I would just like to point out that Section 8 likely violates one or more provisions of the United States Constitution because it prohibits payment in United States legal tender currency. Under 31 U.S.C. 5103, the states cannot prohibit the use of U.S. legal tender, including U.S. coins and Federal Reserve notes, for purposes of payment of obligations. This legal tender provision has been upheld by the Supreme Court, and therefore any contrary state law violates the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution. So that's what this bill does. I hope you would consider those facts when you decide if you're going to vote yes or no, and give this bill a red light.
Representative Ankney. Representative Barrett. There being no further discussion, does the sponsor wish to close?
Mr. Chairman, I do. I'd like to address some concerns. I don't know where the good Representative Hands got her information, but I have in front of me the fact that Gold Money, which is an exchange unit, Gold Money does not charge a fee for opening and holding, and no fees charged are charged if there's nothing held. Okay, the currency transactions run about 0.12%. To give you a reference to this, I have a statement from the Legislative Fiscal Division for, I believe it's February. Our transaction fees for the state are currently $48,000 a month. In retrospect to Gold Money, to hold an account in the amount estimated at $500 million, which is the rough estimate of the tax on tobacco products. I have a letter here confirming that that cost would be about $60,000 a year for that amount, and that would cover auditing and insurance costs to that fund. Ladies and gentlemen, it's easy to stand up and argue without facts, but I would suggest that that's some of those that have been done, and without any real discernment into these issues. Not one of these questions came up in committee by Representative Hands or Representative Barrett. Matter of fact, Representative Barrett made the statement in committee that the purpose of keeping this system that we have is, its primary purpose is to redistribute wealth. Well, I would suggest that's exactly what I'm against. And there's no conspiracy here. This is a well laid out plan that I'm trying to put into place here, and it's not to succeed, but it is to fulfill Article 2, Section 1 of our self-governing authority. The people have the exclusive right of governing themselves as a free, sovereign, and independent state. Does that mean succession? Not necessarily. I do not support or endorse succession, but I do support and endorse prosperity. And I would suggest that we cannot remain free or sovereign if we're poor. If we're poor and we're subjected to theft, manipulated by the Federal Reserve System and the world banking system. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd ask you to think outside of the box. However, I think the problem is we've been taught to think outside of the box so long we don't know what the box is. The box is in this document. I'm in the box. I'm in the constitutional duty and provision of the oath that I swore to uphold on the first day of this session, ladies and gentlemen. This is not a party line issue. This is about honesty. Prosperity flows from honesty. Please vote green.
The question now arises on the motion of Representative Wagner that when this committee does rise and report after having under consideration House Bill 513, it recommend that the same do pass. Those in favor of the motion will vote aye. Those opposed vote no. Are there absentee votes?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker has voted no.
Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change his or her vote? If not, the clerk will record the vote.
Mr. Chairman, 48 representatives have voted aye, 52 have voted no.
House Bill 513 fails. Members of the committee, you have before you